today we continue with data analysis, and I know that I always have been saying this is an analysis of a qualitative interview data. When you go through the work itself, you will see when we go through the slides that some of the terms are generic and they can apply to other traditions and the qualitative research. So I think the focus might be, the point of departure might be interviews, but this is applicable to qualitative data analysis in general. And the specific focus today is developing categories for interview data analysis. Our first authors are still the same, but I've just added today, when I wanted to clarify some of the points, Roberts. And I do know that we used Roberts last month when we dealt with the interview guide. So there is a mixture of sources of information here. The UNISA template actually governs what you can do. And this these blue colors here are here because the slides were developed before the template could be adapted. Otherwise, when I tried to instruct the technology to adapt some of the designs, it is not, it cannot configure, it cannot be adapted. So it might be the last time that the beautiful colors are seen here. But we want to continue to say that we are recording this workshop, and as usual, is going to be available at the UNISA. We always have put its name there, UNISA Gauteng Region YouTube platform. And I think the majority of you are used to it and are able to access, and you are continuing to access the recordings of the previous workshops. So this one will also be available in the same platform. We confirm again that the one-on-one sessions continue, and these take place on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, almost every of these days. I actually keep myself busy with one-on-one sessions. I'm enjoying them, and some of those that have been participating might actually attest that they enjoy the engagement, because we are able to open up, but on a very focused point, because we deal with a specific topic, which is a topic under investigation. So every concept related that is unpacked is related to what is being investigated by the researcher. So on that note, you are allowed to again ask questions individually via the emails. You can share some work that you have produced via the emails. The email is there, it's machelehc@gmail.com. You can share draft proposals. You can share any of the chapters that will eventually be part and parcel of the research report. We engage on those. And the manner in which we do it is that if you share with me, I comment and send back my comments to you. And if you also want to make further follow-up, you are allowed to bounce it back with me, either electronically or to arrange a one-on-one session now via Teams, where we can speak and we can continue to clarify what I've commented. And this assists us in improving the original text, the original document, before it is submitted for examination. So already you have seen the specific authors that from where some of the information came from. So from those, we have just selected those sections that assist us to understand specific concepts. So and I again want to emphasize that I don't present in this workshop rules or regulations. It is guidelines which are suggestive. In other words, you are allowed to chop and change. You can question, you can use your own insight, your own development. You don't have to take it, but it's advisable that if you want to throw it away, you can consult other sources or the specific sources that I've provided. Then you can have your own interpretation. But the most important aspect that I always reiterate is that when you take a decision on your research work, on your research journey, you must be able to justify that. Justification means that you have read sources that allows you to adopt a specific concept or a specific approach. Your approach should be scientifically acceptable. So a lot of authors would have written good about a lot of concepts, and that is what we need to use and take into account. And then we want this workshop to be interactive. And what will happen is, as usual, I will go through the slides, stimulating discussions, and I request that you note things that you want us to debate or to discuss, something that you want to make inputs on, so that when I pause, you are able to make a contribution. If you don't have a contribution in a way of comment, you can ask questions where possible. I'll be able to answer. And also, as always, when I don't know how to answer, some of you are sources of responses. And all of us are good researchers who will go for those aspects that we do not have answers. We go and make research so that in the next workshop, we start sharing again, as we did last week. And thank you very much for that engagement. Today, we've got specific outcomes for the workshop. The workshop should assist us to recognize the different uses of the terms, codes, categories, and concepts in research. Here, the author has written in literature, differentiating the different types and purposes of categories. And the whole workshop is mainly about developing categories in data analysis. We should be able to understand the relevance of the interview guide, that it is a tool that we use to structure our interviews. And when we do analysis, we also base categorization or the development of categories on on the interview guide, because it already gives form to how categories should be developed or be structured. So we should also be able to use it as a result. We should be able to use this interview guide in the development of categories. Then we should be able to know the criteria for the quality of category system. This is what will also be presented, so we can understand how quality categories look like, or what the criteria are. In other words, our categories should meet specific criteria. So if we are to maintain an accepted quality standard for the development of the categories. And we start with the tools of analysis, which are mainly codes, categories, and concepts. And we've been told that we should understand different uses, their different uses in literature or in research. Now, if we can recapitulate what has been done up to this point in the analysis process, you remember we made reference to what should happen even before one could start doing data analysis, or we have touched on some of the stages, processes. But here today we are just zooming on developing of categories. And this is after we would have done some earlier stages in stage one that we were dealing with on Tuesday. Up to this stage, we accept that researchers would have followed clear methodological guidelines using an interview guide. They would have structured the interviews and conducted them with the participants. And of course, they've been given feedback because they've captured the responses accordingly. They would have recorded the interviews, as I've said, as audio files, taken notes on the course of the interview, transcribed the interviews, according to well-established rules, and prepared the data for computer-aided analysis. We've been even asking about this. And we said the librarian should be able to advise us on how to capture data on the computer-aided systems. But in addition, the researchers have already should have at this stage already familiarized themselves with the data, and they should have marked important text passages, recorded ideas for analysis, and perhaps even written initial case summaries. And all of these, in this last statement, have been discussed um, in the earlier workshop on Tuesday. And we want to see how that basis, as we go on, assists us in the development of categories. The relatively free step of data exploration is now followed by a systematic step, and in our opinion, such a systematic analysis of the interview requires working with codes, categories, and concepts. But the question can be, which ones? Which codes, categories, or concepts? And the reader can also, or anybody who hears us talking, can ask us, are we now going to talk about codes or categories or concepts? And when do we talk about those? And how do we use it and when? This already addresses the problem of a certain confusion or of terms which should be discussed in more detail here. Let us start from the beginning by understanding what a code is. And there's a definition here which is provided by Saldana. And the definition reads like this: a code in qualitative inquiry is most often a word or short phrase that symbolically assigns a summative, salient, essence capturing, and or evocative attribute for a portion of language based or visual data. And I always tell people that a code assigns a meaning to words or to statements. So I just summarized it for myself, and I just tried to use a layman's language so that I should remember what I mean. When I come across the word code, then I remember I must always be knowing that I'm going to assign a meaning to a set of statements or to some words or some phrases. Furthermore, he also, Saldana continues, uh, he states, I advocate that qualitative codes are essence capturing and essential elements of the research story that, when clustered together according to similarity and regularity, they actively facilitate the development of categories and thus analysis of the connections. Now, already here there's an indication that codes are below categories. And in my own understanding, a collection of codes will lead into the development of categories. And there's another statement which is very important here, which says analysis of their connections, meaning that you cannot have the same, you cannot have a number of codes that belong to a category if they are not related. They are under a specific category because they are related. And all of them, they are under a specific category because they are related to it. So the category is also related to all of them. So that is how one should work it out of his mind. In these short quotations, Saldana establishes a hierarchy between codes and categories, and I've explained this. Codes are grouped, and this makes it easier to form categories and analyze their relationships with each other. I don't want to be repetitive. The variety of conceptual uses of the term codes, concept, and category sounds confusing. And the confusion is perhaps even greater when one realizes that the methodological literature in the field of communication and media studies almost exclusively uses the term category and not the term code. The categorization of a text is also referred to as coding. That is much confusing, because if we are not using coding, we're using categories, but we refer to the process as coding. Eh? And those who do so are also referred to as coders. Why don't we call this process coding? And why don't we call these um, uh, these tools codes? Why don't we use codes instead of categories? Because we've got coders and we've got a process of coding. That is what will confuse a lot of people that are reading. Let us note that most scholars agree that the data are coded with the help of analytical tools. The tools are just described using different terms. There is also an agreement that these tools, whether we are talking of categories, codes, or concepts, or the themes, are further developed in the course of the qualitative analysis process through various procedures such as grouping, summarizing, differentiating, focusing, and identifying key categories. And sometimes before this year, and even before I could prepare for this workshop, the whole time I was thinking that the groups that I would eventually develop when I group similar statements together will eventually be themes. And I do believe that in my earlier studies where I was conducting research and where I had to submit something for examination, I think every time I've been able to use the terminology of the themes or thematic classification or whatever that has to do with themes. I've never said anything about the code. I've never said anything about the categories. Now, I used to understand that different authors would have different background. They would have different preferences in terms of the language that they use. So they would use terminology that is suitable, that they feel comfortable with. And that to us as readers, if we are not authors ourselves, we also get confused, particularly if we are learning how to do research for the first time. Because if another book is talking about a category and the other one starts to talk about codes, and all of them do not say something about either a code or a theme, or sorry, a category, or either a category or a theme. So you get confused that in another book there is coding, in another book there's a category. Then you must ask what the difference is if you don't read a lot. But if you read a lot, there are others like these guys who would tell you that no, the different uses of these terminologies is just a preference and it should not confuse us. The most important aspect is the process of building similar statements and eventually coming up with codes or with categories or themes or groups of statements that are classified, and that would eventually make sense of the data that has been collected. And if we do so, we are actually building a case and we are actually trying to respond to research questions with respect to the topics or the phenomenon under investigation. Now, there's also now, as we continue, category names and category types. So we're going to look at categories now. We have adopted in this workshop that we would mainly talk about categories, and that is the reason why this workshop is referred to as building categories. If you want to call them themes, you can call them themes. And if you've got a better terminology that you can use, such as concept, it's dependent on you. If you will be able to justify that, and if there's a source that uses that and you prefer that one, you can do that and you can justify it, and you also engage the study leader that is supporting you. Then they can also advise you. I think specific disciplines and colleges might even have preferences. I'm not sure how they use it, but I've come across a number of you from different colleges that use different approaches in developing your research proposals, and the approach that you adopt when you go to chapter 2 and the terminology that is used. And I noted that this is because of the different discipline or the background that you have in your own discipline. So categories are an important tool for the analysis of qualitative data. They are used for classification, for reduction, for abstraction and attribution of meaning, and can be used for indexing, describing, and explaining the data. Some of this terminology, I think, will become clear as we continue, but I take them from a layman's point of view. For an example, reduction is to reduce something into small. Classification is coming from classify. So this is how I actually explain them to myself. But you see, The categories are used for all these purposes. We will see it. Today we will be able to see how they are used on classifying, on grouping similar things together and similar statements, similar information together in order to build a case. And this case is something that is going to go into a chapter. And a chapter is actually already part and parcel of the research report. Categories usually consist of one word or a 2 to 4 word combination. We will be able to make an example of what they've presented as an example from their book. I don't have my own example today, but if we are required to deviate out of what I have here as representation, we can also use external examples. But when working with categories, you should be aware that they differ not only in length and wording, but that in practice, different types of categories are used. The following types of categories are distinguished. We're going to look at them, at a number of them. We won't go into details, but we just want to indicate that they are different. We'll just make a small statement about them. I cannot read everything about them, but fact categories, you can see, it already tells you that these categories should be about facts that are presented, that are part and parcel of the responses from the interviewees, from your research participants. And the fact categories refer to variable, unambiguous circumstances or events. These are facts. This is what is referred to. And there are thematic categories that denotes topics that are discussed, arguments, the patterns of thinking, and are very common in practice. And there's a lot of examples that can be cited. But suffice to say that thematic categories are mainly a categorization or categories about the topics or about arguments or even patterns. And there is now further evaluative scaling categories that are used to assess the degree or the characteristics of an aspect or a phenomenon. And there's a lot of examples that can be presented by the first, but the one here, which is made here, is a dichotomous one scale that can be used here, such as present or not present. Now, they refer to this as part of evaluative or scaling categories. The other example or grouping or name is the analytical categories, which arise as a result of the analysis of the data. And compared to thematic categories, analytical categories are characterized by a higher degree of abstraction and interpretation. But thematic ones are very practical and very specific, topical, straightforward. So they differ from analytical ones. And the theoretical ones, again, they are those that refer to an existing theory. So they can be based on a theory that is already in existence. They can also be deduced directly from a theory. Alternatively, an analytical category can also become a theoretical category if theories are referred to in the process of its development. Now, you remember in grounded theory, when we were developing theories, there it means a lot of categories would belong to theoretical category, and those categories will be referred to as theoretical. Then there are natural categories, which are words and phrases used by the interviewees. Now, remember, if you have an interview guide, we have already said that an interview guide assists you to structure your categories. And remember, it means when you are going to identify categories, the basic ones, the normal ones and the common ones, will be imaging from your, actually, but the formal ones will be imaging from your interview guide as you have decided. But remember, you are going to be told new things by your responses. By your respondents. Your interviewees, those research participants, do not know what is contained in your interview guide, so they can respond in their own way. And when that happens, you find that some of their responses is not even listed as part of what would be asked or what would be responded. Then as a result, they lead to the development of the natural categories. So in other words, in the building of your categories or in the structuring of your categories, then it is important also to take into account that there are categories which are going to emerge as natural, and they should not be thrown away just because they don't link up with the interview guide, because they too are, are contributing to the answering of the research questions. Then there are formal categories, which are categories for formal characteristics of the interviews. For an example, the number of words in the transcript or the number of speech contributions by a person. These are formal. This is how these authors have defined formal categories. In addition, they are also ordering, structuring categories that are not directly used in the analysis, which are not directly assigned to any of the text passage. These do not organize the data, but the categories themselves are organized through these categories, and thus take on a structuring function for the category system to ensure clarity and a good structure. So the structuring will happen basically because there is a system of a category, a system of categories, and you will use, we are referred here to categories that will be referred to as structure. So those are important for making sure that the structure is sound and it is not irrelevant. So there is good organization. A structure is always systematic. It follows a systematic approach. Whether it is in a hierarchy, it's other that if it is a hierarchy, it can follow a cone shape where the apex is pointed up with a broad base. So categories are also arranged either vertically in that format or in a linear format. So these structuring categories are very, very important. And very often, interview guides are grouped by subject areas, which can be adopted one-to-one as structuring categories. You see now, there, when you designed the interview guide, you were not analyzing data, but you were trying to provide a good structure to create order in the manner in which you are going to approach the interviews. You've got specific questions that start in the beginning, and you've got specific questions that drill in specific topics, and you've arranged that accordingly. And when you close, sometimes you might even have closing statements or closing questions to your with your interviewees. So this is just an indication of an example of the structuring categories. As the previous consideration and the listing of different category types make clear, categories differ in terms of various characteristics. And therefore, we are going to look at these characteristics, what characterizes a good category. What are the characteristics of the categories? In other words, characteristic number one, scope of a content. Categories can be very narrow or they can be very broad. Individual environmental behavior or waste separation. Something that relates to an individual is very narrow, and something that relates to a group of people is broad. The degree of complexity and abstraction. The previous example shows that categories can also be formulated at different levels of abstraction. Analytical and theoretical categories are by definition at a higher level of abstraction than the natural ones. The natural categories is the direct statements that are said that are part and parcel of the responses that are given by the respondents. But the theoretical categories and the analytical one are at a higher level, and these are not very practical. They are just concepts at a very high level. significance and relevance to the core topic of the study. I think this word, yes, okay. Important thematic categories have a different significance in the study than supplementary categories, which are used, for an example, to record the context of biographical background of the people interviewed. Yes, there's that information that when you classify, when you code, you group together. It's very relevant and it is important, without which you cannot be able to respond to a research question. But there are those other categories that are there in addition to what the core categories are. They can glorify, they can substantiate, they can make the report look good, beautiful, or they can provide additional understanding of the report. So the importance and the significance of the categories also matter.
Okay, these coding and categories. What I want to know, what do I do if I find that my supervisor doesn't know anything about it? Where do I refer? I'm thinking of if I'm going to refer and say Dr. Korombi said sometimes is not a good thing for other academics. I don't know which source do I have to use and say this is where I got it, and therefore maybe is an open-minded uh, supervisor who also love to go to the source for himself and learn about them. Or how and where do I refer the supervisor?
uh, you know, you, I have the source, particularly that source that I've indicated to you. That source is very good. Let me just, can I open another, can I go to the beginning so that I can show you the source? They have got a full book on it. That book is only about the data analysis, and it's only about um, coding and categories. All those subtopics that I said we will deal with, they come from that book, and in there, that language of coding is up and down. I do know that there is a book from Sage, and it is edited by Flick. That one I can also refer to you. But that book did say something about coding. I forgot if they said something about categories. But those books, I can make them all available to you. If you are unable to access them online, I can just email them to you. Just get hold of me outside this system, outside the workshop, so I can send the books to you. Now, I feel that if somebody is asking you can't say you heard it from me only. No, you can say within the practice, we with other researchers, this is the terminology that is emerging or that other people are preferring. But I have also read from this literature and this literature and this literature. And I think if you go into the system and hunt for categories and for codes, you will find some people that have written about them. And so it can even become clear. There is another book. Who is that? Asa, I think. Is it Asa? The book that I've used the other time when we were looking at data collection methods. Did they do interviews, focus group, and all those? They also have a chapter that talks about coding. They've got basic coding and advanced coding. I didn't read a lot about them, but I preferred this one because this one specifically spoke about the interviews, and it was when I was trying to prepare something on interviews that I got fascinated with them, and I think there are quite a number of them. All these books that I've mentioned, if you remind me, I can forward to you, and if there's a chapter in there, you will be able to see, unless if I can also specify which chapter. But this one, this very book, is only about, it's talking the language that I'm using now is an extract, is some other things. Some things are verbatim from that book. You can use those books beside mentioning a specific researcher, but It is a practice which is imaging. Anybody else who wants to make a comment or a question? If there is none, then we'll go now deeply into the approach and the strategy of indeed doing the development of categories. And I will mention something uh, that will assist immediately when we resume. Uh, I want to say this to you, colleagues. Uh, you know the terminology might matter, but what matters most is the process that you undergo when you are analyzing data, and the way that we are looking at these processes is a way in which uh, authors have simplified an approach. They are actually teaching us an approach, and if we can adapt some of these approaches, then we are not going to jumble mumble. We will not jump up and down. We will not be lost when we find data, whether it is a lot of it or it is liquid. Because remember the intro, they even taught us that we can, if it is very large, how to manage it, how to reduce it. And this coding process is a way of making sure that data is easily handled. And even the approach of analyzing is faster. I remember in my case, when I was analyzing data, I never followed these guidelines. And I had to devise strategies on how to classify that. I would go and identify themes right there that this talks about um, the protection of animals. This is talking about the respect of animals. This is talking about the utilization of animals. This is talking about the protection of fountains. And I will, in all my documents, either use a red pen or a different font or writing to make sure that everything that I've marked 1 or 2 or 3 or I've named it this category, when I am going through and when I'm doing the analysis and starting to write the definitions or the passages themselves, then I can pick up those. All the twos will go to the same paragraph or to the same section. All the threes, the same paragraph or to the same section. And specific statements under them will be building up the category. And this is what we're talking about. Whether they refer to it as a hierarchy or whatever, at the end of the day, the writing, the development of hierarchies is going to result into a chapter. And that chapter is part and parcel of the research report. This is what we're dealing with here. So let us just continue now and see in this strategy what terms are there and what processes are there. The interview guide is a starting point. And I refer us to the previous workshop where we used the interview guide as a data collection tool. You remember? We said we developed this to facilitate semi-structured interviews where the guidelines does have topics. It does not have questions. The interview guide has got topics that are there that should be focused when you are facilitating interviews or when you're asking questions from an interviewee. And we have said, the interview is open to say anything about what he's being asked or what is she's being asked. And the other thing that I also brought to your attention is that because it is not a very strict type of questioning and responding, it just stimulates discussions. Sometimes participants go astray and they go outside of the boundaries of the research question and they tell you things that you don't want. Now, remember, if you have transcribed from a recorded version and you have used a recording device, every garbage that has gone into the audio has been recorded and has been transcribed. So you've got a job to sift and throw it away. And that is what happens when you explore the data. There are things that do not relate to the research topic and that are not part and parcel of what you are researching. But in addition with what is relevant that you are actually collecting, there is that which you have asked and that which you did not ask, which is also relevant and it is brought in by your interviewee, a research participant. So an interview guide facilitates that interaction. So that interview guide is actually the structure that is going to inform the um, the development of categories. That's why I'm not going to read everything, because I think you still remember that we used Roberts 2020 to define what an interview guide is. He says it is an instrument which is used to guide, which is used to bridge your research questions. Now, we have said that, and we cannot go back to that one. Unlike a standardized questionnaire, the questions actually asked do not need to be exactly what you have written down in your guide. This is just a revision, and I don't have to go into details in that. But suffice to say that we would have an interview guide already with us. And now I want to continue now with today's. Guides usually comprise between 1 and 3 pages, depending on the breadth of the content and the planned duration of the interview. More extensive guides should be avoided. So we don't need to have very long guide. And this we have said, they are either between 10 and 15 questions. And I have demonstrated that I actually had more than 15 questions. Luckily, I was able to even to handle the data that I received. But here we are advised and we are warned that very long guides are not good. So they are there, we know what they are used for. So this is just an example of what the authors of this book have done. And they presented this example of an interview guide to show us that from an interview guide, you will see that there are groups of questions. Those groups of questions, in accordance with these authors, they constitute categories. So you can have, from the interview guide that they have presented, you would have two categories in this slide. The one which says concepts of the world is a category because it's a group of questions. And then the other one which says conceptions of others, so the second group. So we've got two categories according to this interview guide. And then self-image, third category, closing, fourth category. Now, in this study, and 4 thematic blocks, as I've indicated in this example that we've looked at. In other words, the guideline that we've looked at, it had 4 categories, 4 groups of questions. Therefore, those are translated into blocks, and they are referred to here as categories. How do participants see their relationships to global? It is what the guideline was all about. But as already mentioned, we assume that in the focused analysis of qualitative interviews, the interviews are conducted using a structuring interview guide. While they're repeating this, they want us to take note of the terminology structuring interview guide, that it is structured interviews. Then again, the same tool that structured interviews, data collection, is used to structure data analysis. That is why from it, a great deal of preliminary work will have gone into this guide at the outset. And this includes the state of knowledge on the research topic is reviewed and possibly summarized in condensed expose. And this means that you must remember, you do have research questions from your research, your chapter 1 or research proposal. And there you've got research objectives. And a lot of what you're going to do in your research questions is guided by the intent of the study, and there is literature that has contributed to it. Gaps in the knowledge are identified. You know that you've identified gaps in the knowledge in terms of your research statement of problem. The focus and the interest of the study are translated into the research questions, and the structure and content of the interview guide are developed with the intended outcome of the study. The intended outcome is that the study should close the knowledge gap in the body of knowledge. Okay? Now, in the statement of problem, you've indicated that there is a gap that you're going to close. You close that gap by asking relevant research questions and by pursuing specific research objectives. So those point to what the ultimate product should be. And that ultimate product is an answer to your study, to your research questions. The guide is therefore not just a survey instrument, but the entire preliminary work is expressed in it. And then it has got the background, it has got the gap, then it also points at what should be brought in to close the gap. So it is that is the reason why it is even used to structure the data analysis, because data analysis was actually data was collected using it. So we analyze it using it again. Therefore, in the second step of the focused interview analysis, categories are developed based on the interview guide. I've repeated this many times today. The next slide shows how categories can be developed from the interview guide presented above. The interview guide that I said has got 3 groups of questions. Then we will see how those questions were translated into categories. The questions in the guide are translated one after another into categories, as I've said, with the essential core points from the question being summarized in one or more appropriate. You will see um, the essential points will be summarized in one or more appropriate words. It is advisable to choose the labels of the categories in such a way that their correspondence to the questions in the guide remains discernible. Yes, that the categories are actually way of responding to specific questions. Particularly if a large number of categories are created, the thematic blocks can be used as structuring categories for a better overview. Now, here, what you see here on the far left are those questions that were contained in the interview guide that we presented. The one that I said has got 4 groups of questions. So those 4 groups of questions have been also captured here. But on the far right, there are categories, something that has been used to capture the core meaning, the core contents of those questions. So the first category, the one conceptions of the the first set of questions, the conceptions of the world have got at least 3 categories that have been developed from it, because there are at least 3 questions that I see. We have got a question that relates to, in your view, what are the world's biggest problem in the 21st century? So a category notes that this question is about the biggest world problems. In other words, what we are saying here is that if we go to the responses that were provided by the research participants, because we have asked them about the biggest problems in the world biggest problems in the 21st century, we expect indeed to find responses that talk about the biggest world. That is a summary. So anything that relates to the biggest world will be written under this category. If this big category has got other subcategory under it, then again they will also be written under this. We will later talk about the subcategories. Now, the second question, which says, how can these problems be dealt with? Can they be dealt with at all, or by whom? You see now the central issue is the efficacy of actually addressing those problems. That is why the category is referred to as a societal efficacy. When you think of climate change, the third question, when you think of climate change and the necessary education of carbon dioxide emission, can a change in consumer habits in developed countries have a positive effect? Now, they say a central topic here, a central point here, that is of essence, is consumption and climate. And therefore, a category is referred to as consumption and climate. And anything that has to say, that has to talk about consumption, and that has to talk about consumption and climate in relation to climate, would be grouped under that category. So this process continues for all the questions. Question 4, question 5 up to the 8th question, the last one of learnability. You could see that the 8th question, which says, do you think it is possible to learn? And if you were to, even if you don't look at this or on your far right, when you hear the word learn, this question is about learning, knowing, acquiring new knowledge. And the other thing that will become clear as we continue is that these terms are not the only ones that can be used, because learnability has to do with education, acquisition of knowledge, understanding, all of those things. There are other words or other phrases or other statements that can be used here to actually represent the core of what the question is all about. So everything that has to do with learning, with education, with knowing, with acquisition of knowledge will all be grouped under learnability. So if there's a heading that I'm writing in a chapter that has to do with learning or with education, um, about these problems, then it is under everything is clubbed together. Whether the heading is learnability, or it will be told, it will be called learning about the problems of the world. Strategy, education about the strategies of the problems of the world. Then everything is discussed under that, whether it is a subcategory or a sentence, a statement, a word, a phrase, a paragraph, a section, everything would be under that one. And we are saying here, we're talking about categories. And that is how we can analyze the data in relation to the interview guide. You see the importance of the interview guide now. This is how you translate the questions or the groups, the groupings from the interview guide to inform the development of the category system or the categories. There are always several possibilities to develop categories from an interview guide. That is to say, there is no 100% correct solution for the wording of the categories. This I've already said, that you can change it or bring another statement or a phrase. In this example, authors have deliberately chosen short names for the categories. For example, relation, action, and responsibility. You have seen these as on your far right, on our far right, as to represent the core, the essence of what the question is all about. And this would be what essence is perceived in terms of the responses and the discussions and everything, whether it is a quotation or a statement or a phrase or a story about a specific question that has been asked in relation to the study question, in relation to the phenomenon under investigation. This is useful for the further analysis and readability of the tables and visualization, which will be described under stage 5 or step 5, which is referred to as analysis options after coding. This we will still look at. Short category labels also facilitate communication within the scientific community. Now, after all, a category such as responsibility in the context of the climate issue is an excellent way to conduct a scientific debate that makes a preference to the existing debates and theories developed in the community. The meaning of the categories such as action in the analysis of the interview data of the climate awareness study must then be described in detail in the category definition. And colleagues, if there is something that is vague and that is not complete in terms of the development of the categories or the naming or the tag, the labeling of a category, you still have a section that allows you to define or to describe, to explain what is meant by any of the category. It will show you what needs to be included. It will show you what should be excluded. It can even explain what it entails and what it refers. That is that will become clear later in the next in some of the slides. In this way of developing categories, no attempt is made to integrate the possibly complex and differentiated understanding of a category completely into category name. It must be stated explicitly that the presented decision for the wording of the category names is not the only option. Now, instead of relation, the term own possession would also have been conceivable. And instead of consumption and climate, one could also have chosen potential influence of consumption of climate to emphasize the case, the cause-effect relationship. This is what I've said. You can use any other terminology as long as it represents the grouping and it is relevant, and all other statements, all information related to that notion will be discussed under that one. When translating the interview guide into categories, the rule that one question should result in one category does not necessarily apply, because as questions 2 and 6 show, several questions can be covered by a single category. So a single category can borrow from a number of questions. Now, I haven't seen when you're collecting data, and if you have already started collecting data in the field, you should have noted that if you are interviewing a research participant, you ask them questions. They don't answer what you've asked only. They can even answer a question that is still yet to be asked. You see? So, and if you capture that response under that question, it does not mean they cannot repeat it again in another one. Exactly, this shows that there might be a relation there is a relationship in the questions themselves, because they all are going to contribute to the research question. So what they are saying here is that when you've got a category, don't think that it will only relate to one question. It can cover a number of them. Conversely, several categories can also be created if several clearly different aspects are addressed in one question. You see now, one question can have a lot of responses and then can result into a multiplicity of categories emerging from responses from one question. So, however, this is not the case in the example given. For a bachelor's and master's thesis, as well as for dissertations, it may be useful to integrate a table interview guide corresponding category, similar to the one presented in the previous slides, into the methods section or the appendix for documentation purposes. So the readers can even see the categories that has informed the analysis of the data. So when they read, then it is a simpler way of improving their understanding. The table can also be expanded to include additional columns such as aspired insights and justification. So the insight that one wants to get from the table, if it is presented and if it is used as an attachment, as an appendix.
Mine is
Good
just a
evening.
comment. I've collected my data and I'm aligning with what you are explaining now, even in terms of when you conducting your interviews, that you get one question, you pose a question, and then it has got multiple, probably other categories or sections that it is covering. So yeah, I think what you're explaining is making sense. And even in the creation of now of translating your research questions, forming those categories from there. Thank you for the explanation. It makes sense now. Thanks.
My pleasure. And anybody else who wants to make a comment, thank you for that. That was very good. You see, this is what I like. People that now that you are in the field, these things are no longer theory, they are practice, and you can make sense of it. And if something does not make sense and you have seen it in the field, that no, what this author is saying or what Korombi is saying now today is not what I've seen in the field. Come up and say it. And that experience is very, very important because it contributes to the body of knowledge. And that is what we want, because that is education at its best.
My question is based on structuring your research questions. Is it possible or correct to design your question with the category in mind, that when you list down your questions, you list them under categories? Because whether we like it or not, when you think about questions, you always have something in mind. Or what is the intention of designing this question? I want to know about the behavior. So you already have a category. Can you do that? Is it possible? And is it correct? Thank you.
I don't have. Okay. Nomhle, do you want to respond to that one?
Hi, Doctor. No. I've got my own question.
Can you hold?
Similar to.
Can you hold? Please hold on to that. Let's hold on to that. Let's first entertain this one. We'll come to it. Ne?
Okay.
Is there anybody who has got a response to this one?
Or Dr. Korombi, can she maybe perhaps repeat, and then hopefully maybe I'll attempt as well, if possible.
Okay, Anderson, can you please repeat the question? But I've heard you, Anderson.
My question is it correct to design your research question with the category in mind? Because my thinking is when you structure your question, you already have a category in mind. An example I'm giving is that you intend to find out about something. Your research title or is very broad, but your intention would be, I would like, say for instance, I would like to know about the behavior of these people. So that's a category. So your question will be listed around under that. So I want to know that is that process correct, or is it possible to happen, or it's not correct to do? Yeah.
Hi, Doctor. I would love to attempt. Ma'am,
even Yona will also attempt to do it. Yeah, thank you very much.
Anyway, my hand is already raised, so I'm going to
you
push.
Start.
Yes, thank you. My belief, definitely, yes, it is possible. And I think what's also important is that when you are designing the research, your questions, you need to be guided by the subsection, by your your research questions, including your subsections. And then that will actually enable you to already put your questions into themes, like as you mentioned, something about discipline. What is the perception of discipline? What factors contribute to discipline? So those subsections should actually guide you into developing into those different categories. That's my thinking and contribution.
Thank you very much, Nomhle. Let's hold what Nomhle has said, and let's hear what Yona will say. And then there was somebody who was raising a hand. She will also speak, and then we can discuss.
Okay, thank you, Doc, and researchers. I'm more inclined to not following what my fellow researcher is saying, because I'm extending my mind to think about the issues of bias that probably you may then there are chances that probably you may impose your preconceived maybe ideas onto the data. And probably again, it also depends on the methodology following. Is it inductive or deductive? And those sort of things. That's just my thinking at the moment. That once you have a challenge in then forcing your ideas onto the data and then ignoring what the data is giving you. Thanks.
Beautiful. And there was another hand. Yeah, it is CPay. Yes.
Okay, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Doc, my take on this, tend to be corrected, is that obviously you need to have, okay, it's not obvious, it's just how I understand it. You need to have a theme in mind. So when you are creating questions, you need to have questions that will be that will talk to the theme, so that you focus on a particular theme and not extend it to be broad, so that in such when you are focusing on the analysis, your analysis will then be based on a certain theme. So directly going with or agreeing with what is it Nomhle said earlier on.
Okay, can I make a point? And I'm not going to side. I'm not going to side with anybody here. I'm going to
Okay.
be objective, and I want you to debate with me. Uh, I want to cite an example where I'm going to implement a specific theory. In that theory, there are specific principles, and you will remember the theory of organizational design. There, it had principles, and even in my purpose statement and in my research topic, I made reference to uh, the theory. And when I came to the objectives and the research questions, I even indicated that I will investigate those principles. You see, it was a a deductive approach. Then I was forced to go and ask questions that will respond to the principles so that I can test those principles and say, oh, yes, these are correct. Oh, I want to revise them. They are, my findings are otherwise. Do you hear me? In that way, the design of my study, particularly the theory itself, has dictated what type of data I should collect. And this is the reason why during data collection, your questions are actually principle based on the theories that you are going to implement. And when you analyze data, there is a comparison between what the theory says and what the findings are. You see, in that case, I cannot uh, only now I suspend the decision on the categories. I cannot only then influence the categories because I'm actually guided by a theory. So then I am managed. I have to follow that one. That is another side of my story. Ne? But I want to come with another side. Because I'm a nature conservator and I had assumptions that the culture of the Bavenda contributes to the conservation of the fountains and the protection of animals. In my mind, I think, no, man, I must find out whether this is true or not true. Or if I'm biased, I want to prove that the Bavenda can protect the fountains. You see, I'm biased. I want to prove that the Bavenda can protect the fountains. Or I want to find out if indeed they do this and that and that. Then if I'm saying that the categories are not yet, oh, might I can say, oh, something about the fountains might be a category. And something about the animals might be a category. But I don't have to say it must be a category. But the outcomes must tell me which categories are there. Now, the other thing that I'm interested on is the biasness that um, that Rambiwa spoke about. And I think in earlier workshops, we said a person has got a point of view, has got a background, has got a world view, and the person has got a possession. We referred to possessionality. And therefore, as a result, I always have assumptions. I've got preconceptions, prior knowledge and prior expectations about this topic and about what I want to investigate. And we have been warned that we must suspend that when we approach our data and when we collect data so that we can manage the element of bias. So I can't answer this one, but I think you people have been answering it correctly. And please use literature and do justify the choices that you make when you are actually making choices and deciding on which category to do. But be cautious of the bias, the element of bias. And so don't misrepresent the data that you collect. And there is no way that as a conservator, I want to think about my background. No, but I'm told I must suspend that. I must actually make sure that it does not pollute the data that I collect. But my insight when I'm analyzing will always assist me in packaging the categories. That is what I can say. So I'm somewhere in the middle, and I can anybody who does something and justifies it. If you justify it, there I'm going to side with you. Is there anybody who wants to say something before we can go back to the presentation? Yes, Nomhle. Oh, yes. You. I didn't
Yeah,
give you an opportunity to ask. Yes. It's your
yes,
time now.
not a problem, doctor. We needed to sort out the other issue. I've
Yes.
got a bit of I don't know whether should I say it's a comment slash
Yes.
question.
Mhm.
I'm also doing coursework, so I'm in my I've just submitted my second assignment, action research.
Mhm.
So it's just that I
Yes.
wanted to give an example of a something practical that I did, especially when it came to designing a questionnaire. So
Yes.
my topic for the action research was looking at the influence of the use of electronic textbooks in a high school, and
Yes.
this was based on the fact that my son had just started high school, and I saw the interruptions. I mean, from a manual to an electronic, and there were a lot of interruptions. So that actually sparked that idea, and I decided, just to do, like an action research project. So during
Okay.
the development, yes. So during doing the literature work, the questions around it, the questions actually assisted me in developing the themes for the interview guide, because at the end of the day, the main aim was, how would the adoption of tablets,
Mm.
influence or have an impact on student engagement, which was one theme, the learning
Mhm.
outcomes, and the overall effectiveness. And this actually led me to having close to plus minus about 40 questions. So besides the
Mm.
biographical data, which consists of plus minus 4, the
Mm.
others were, subcategorized into, for example, access. Do you have access
Mhm.
to the tablet? How often do you use it in class? So already when I'm analyzing the data, which I'm going to be doing probably the next 2 weeks, because the assignment is due end of next
Yes.
month. So already I know, for example, with e-textbook, how often do you use it? What is your preference? How do you
Mhm.
navigate? Do you that blended learning? How the distraction issue? How often do are you distracted? Do you also maybe use it for games, for social media, TikTok, that type of thing?
Mhm.
And I'm actually quite excited,
Mhm.
because it's going to actually provide a very valuable insight into this whole thing. Yes, we want technology to work for us and obviously for our kids, but me being a researcher and still new in this whole game, so like me attending this workshop today, it somehow gave me an aha moment to say, yeah, it means at least I'm on the right path. So that's just my comment and my contribution.
Yes,
Thank
beautiful. Thank you very much for those. And we want experiences like those. And if you want this book, you have noted, take the name and the year. And if you want me to send you something, please do that. Thank you for that. And you see that experience is the best teacher now. And
you,
you
doctor.
you just mentioned that the literature actually advised you and it guided you on the development of the the questions on the interview guide. Exactly. This is the reason why you cannot go to the field before you do literature chapter. Because when you go to the field, you are lost, you don't know anything. I know that for purposes of ethical clearance, they will even ask you, send us the questions that you're going to ask interviewees. I say, yo, man, what is this? It is a formality. That thing should be flexible. That is the reason why when we go to implement something that is not implementable in the field, although it is part of the proposal, it should be changed. But literature, a very good basis. Thank you very much for all the inputs. Is there anybody else who wants to make an input before we go back? Okay, thank you. We are left with 35 minutes. I don't know if we're halfway. I'll tell you if we're halfway when we start. Um, We are on slide 40 of 70. Oh, yeah, we are there. We are halfway. But we are left with a quarter of the time that we should be using. Let me go back to the presentation mode. Now, the next subheading is adding categories with a theoretical reference. Categories can be developed not only from the interview guide. Now, do you hear now? Now, already during the data exploration steps, aspects relevant to the interest of the study may have emerged which are not covered by the guide and for which it is worth adding further categories. So this is the reason why I said interviewees or participants to the study can even tell you interesting things that you did not even ask and which are very, very important for the study. You cannot just throw them away. And the fact that they're not written, maybe part of your interview guide, it might be that you might think, oh no, these do not fall under any of the categories identified in terms of the guide. But here we are advised we need to we need to consider them, and other categories are allowed. The same applies to theory-driven projects or studies that work with processes or models, for an example. Further categories are developed from the theory or processes model and are also added to the category system. It means anything that was not part and parcel has to be included because it is relevant to the study and it will aid in improving the completeness of the data. Now, formulating first category definitions. Now, all categories that are developed require a definition that is as precise as possible and concisely describes which aspects are to be assigned to the category. In addition to one or two sentences describing the category, the definition may also contain detailed inclusion and exclusion criteria for categories that are difficult to apply. Therefore, if problems of distinction from the categories are to be expected for one category, it is advisable to mention in the definition when the other category is to be used. Now, we have just said that we would have categories, and these categories they are named or they are labeled, they've got names or they are tagged. Now, we need to define what they mean and what they are. And earlier on we said, although we can define what they are or what they mean, we must further indicate what they will exclude, what they will include. In other words, what are those things that are relevant and what are those things that are considered irrelevant, so they will not be discussed under those categories. For an example, one might specify that the category efficacy only covers the influence of society as a whole and is therefore not used when the personal influence of individual responses is involved. When somebody effort is there in solving the world problems, he cannot on his own achieve it. That is why what can be considered can be the group's contribution, because we know that as a group, you make meaningful contribution. Therefore, if there is a category that has to do with efficacy or the capability or the ability to solve the world problems, it will say if there is something that has been done or that relates to an individual, it will not be included under this category. This is how the input and the contribution of the individual will be excluded from that category. In addition, the definition can also include references to key terms that are typical for the application of the category, e.g. fast food for the category consumption. Consumption has to do with eating. And if somebody wants to eat, you can either eat at a cafeteria, and fast foods, you can stand at a window, Kentucky or Steers, then they give you while you are driving through the drive-through. So you can say fast foods are the terminologies that will be included. Consumption also has to do with the table and the cooking, things that will have been cooked, and or the quantity of the food or the types of food, the menu, anything that has to do with that which is eaten can be included, but you can also define what will be excluded. Later, when working through the interview's text, original quotes from the interviews should also be added to illustrate the use of the category. quotations that we have said are very, very important, are an aid to improving the definition of the and the explanation of the category, so they can also be used. Typically, definitions of categories begin with the phrases such as, this category is used when a group of people are actually to make an input, or this category includes all statements in which many people are speaking in one voice. But this category excludes where an individual effort is expended in solving a world problem. So this is just an indication or an examples of how the statements can be worded. Biggest world problems. This category is used when current world problems are named. Just as an example, explained or related to each other, included or are respondents' own positions and evaluation of the world problems. So this is where we said if we are dealing with an individual case, then it's not going to be included under this one. Societal efficacy. This category is used for statements about the society's potential to take action in regard to major world problems, including, no, actually this is the one that can talk about an individual or group of people. Now, how do we develop a good category system? Now we're going to hear about that. A category rarely comes alone. We are rather dealing with a category system consisting of numerous categories. So categories are so many. The category system is also known as a coding frame or code book. Now, do you see now the relationship between codes and categories? The categories of a category system can be organized linearly in a long list, or they can form a network like a structure or a tree or a pyramid. Usually, they are arranged hierarchically in a category tree. That's what I was saying. This means that categories can have subcategories, which in turn can also be subdivided into subcategories. And if you look at how we write sections of a book or a report, you would have a big section. If we are talking about animals, we can, as a big topic, we can have animals that eat meat, and then we can have animals that eat plants, and we can have a third category or a third subcategory of animals that eat both plants and meat. So they are called omnivorous. The other ones are herbivores. Herbivores eat plants only. Carnivores eat meat only. Omnivores eat both plants and meat. So this is how categories can be, but you can have subcategories underneath. So under the animals that eat meat, the carnivores, you've got domestic animals. You've got a cat that stays. No. Sorry. You don't. A cat does not eat meat only, because these days we've even taught it to eat. Let's talk about a dog. It's in the house. It eats meat, but in the bush, another one is a crocodile. What is that? A lion that eats meat. So these are subcategories of a subcategory. You can still go on differently to a very lower level. So that means that it is a system of categories. Most category systems work with 2 to 5 levels, whereby the high number of levels in more complex system is often the result of structuring categories. They are saying the high number of levels in more complex system is often the result of structuring categories. At this point, the question arises as to how a useful system of categories can be identified that supports the analysis effectively and sufficiently. So how is the quality of a category system assessed? And this is what we're going to look at now. In the following, we have compiled important criteria that allow an evaluation of category system and then go into more detail. Therefore, the categories are closely related to the research questions. That is one criteria. The categories are exhaustive. Criteria 2. 3. The categories are elective. 4. The categories are well-worded. 5. The subcategories are characteristics, aspect of their subcategories. And 7. The categories together form a configuration or a gestalt. And 8. The categories are comprehensible. These are very, very long because all the slides here are going to focus on this 8. It means we're going to go into 8 slides in looking into that. So I will be superficial in some instances so that we can also cover the next set of slides. We are left with 25 minutes. Now, we are going to unpack those criteria. Are the categories related to the research question? This is one of the most important points because the categories are an important analytical tool for answering the research question. So all the categories should contribute to the answering, and they only contribute to their answering if they relate to the research question. So if something is not relevant to the research question, if you are exploring your data, you are going to ignore that. If it is there, you are not even going to create a category for it. The categories help to structure the data and thus also analysis process. Are the categories exhaustive? This is an empirical question. If the coding in step 3 reveals that there are other relevant text passages that cannot be adequately captured by the existing categories, this indicates that the categories are not exhaustive. However, a newer category should not be created immediately. It makes more sense to first define a category, other. Then we will just say other, knowing that this we did not expect or is not even informed by the interview guide. Therefore, we pack it as other, and we assign it to this kind of text passage. Then we will look at it at a later stage when we've exhausted other categories and when we see that there's an opportunity actually to add it. At a later stage of the analysis, one can then decide how important this aspect is in the study, whether it was potentially mentioned even more frequently, and whether it would make sense to add a further category for this topic or aspect. Are the categories selective or distinct? Here, it means that selective, it means that the categories are well distinguished from each other. They should not be the same. If they should be the same, we collapse another one. We will collapse one of them and retain one. But this is also partly an empirical question, and the final assessment of the selectivity can only be made when applying the categories. That is when coding. When you're coding, then related things are packaged together. You cannot have related things separated. At this point, I would like to point out a common misunderstanding that we will go into in more detail in step 3. Selective does not necessarily mean that only one category may be applied to one text passage. Now, this is what we've been saying, that a passage could have several interpretations, but this makes it to belong to a number of categories. This can be a reason why we can have more categories that would talk to the same passage of information from the responses. It is quite possible that a statement addresses several aspects. For an example, both societal efficacy and the efficacy of consumer can be addressed in one passage or in one statement. So it might lead to a number of categories, borrowing from the same passage or discussion. Now, are the categories selective? Oh yeah, it is still the same thing. Selectivity means that it is always clear whether a statement belongs to one category and whether it belongs to another category. Yes, that should be very, very clear. We have explained that clearly. Now, the other question is, are these categories well worded? It is important that category names accurately reflect what they are intended to capture and what they stand for. And this is also in relation to their description. And if they are not well worded, then at least your description and explanation will assist to indicate what they contain and what is going to be discussed under that very category. They should therefore be carefully worded. Now, wording is an emphasis, because remember, sometimes you are going your report is going to be read by many people. So you should not use vague language. You must know that you've got a number of stakeholders. When we talk about presenting your research results to stakeholders, you will see that wording is very, very important. And the use of specific terminology and the use of specific approach in communication and the communication media is very, very important. So wording is part of communicating. For an example, it makes a difference when I name a category motives or attitudes. An attitude is not a motive. A motive is something, a reason behind, but an attitude is a behavior, is the type of behavior. So those two things are different. So things that has to do with behavior is attitude related. Things that have to be the rationale and the reason and the why of doing a thing have classified under the motives. So that wording would assist a lot. Here, a look in dictionaries and in theory or encyclopedia can help. Or of course, one should not overdo it when it comes to semantics, and it is not necessary to put every word on a scale, especially since it is also the task of the category definitions to specify how a category should be understood. So although it is good to use this language, this is where I said the use of English is very challenging. We use English, we don't speak English. What I mean in Chivenda is not what I will say in English because I'm not proficient, although I can try or I've been passed, but I'm not an English speaker. So, but we have advised here, we must not be too much semantic and try to use some vulgar words. You see, when you write your research report, use ordinary language, use language that the majority of the people will understand. You're not only writing to the scientific community, you're writing to other people who would understand something about world problems. If we're talking about the the fight between the Palestinians and the fight and the Israelites, that although you are doing political science and you're writing about it, it's not only the political scientists who want to read about it. We also want to, the economists want to understand it because it has got, those are geopolitics that affect the economy of our country, global impact. The war in Ukraine, the war in Israel and Palestine, they've got an economic impact on South Africa and everybody else on the global, because you will find other superpowers trying to support others. Other superpowers, they are going to side and the world is divided on who to side with. So we are impacted because all our resources, some of them are going to be channeled there and our thinking. And that is why our rand goes up and down because of that. So please use the language that is simple, that can be understood by everybody. In any case, it is helpful to present the category system and the category definitions to colleagues and ask their understanding of the terms and to check the consistency between the definition and them. So if you have used maybe terminology that is wrong, the good thing is that the definition itself will assist you because it will tell everybody what is contained in that category. But are the subcategories characteristics or aspects of the apparent category? So there should be a streamlining. A subcategory supports a category. A major category informs all the subcategories. This criterion also often concerns the chosen wording. A simple example. No, I don't want to talk about this example, but I think the explanation is clear because this is going to take, yeah, it can take my time. Now, I want to ask to come to the next one. Do the categories together form a configuration or a gestalt? A category system should be more than a mere stringing together of unrelated categories. It should express a clear structure and a sense of connection. You see, the categories, in other words, subcategories do belong to each other. And categories are related in that they're part and parcel of the same report. And they are actually a way of responding to the research question. It should express a clear structure and a sense of connection. This is almost always the case when the categories follow the order of an interview guide, because it is already structured. So it informs how the categories, they themselves should also be structured. Do the categories together form a configuration? Or it's still the same? It's still the same one. And are the categories comprehensible to the recipients? Now, this is what I was saying. Since the categories are often stated in the research report, in lectures, and in posters, it is advisable to keep the wording relatively simple, keeping the recipients of the study in mind. In this respect, it can be useful to get feedback on the categories by presenting and discussing them. You have got working groups, you've got workshops, and you've got research colloquia. Some of you would also even go to present internationally, or you would also present in national conferences. So you are internationally, you are presenting to people who are not the South Africans. Remember, in South Africa, we speak the South African English. The Germans speak the German English. And in an international conference, you would have somebody from Germany, from Holland, from India, from USA, from Pakistan, from South Africa, from Zambia, from Ghana, and all of those people must hear you talking. Use a standard, a simple English language that everybody will be able to understand. So this starts from your categories. In your categories, please write them in a way that they are understood. You must have your recipients in mind. So can I pause again here? I see that we're running out of time, but I think so far we've done enough. There's the rest of the stuff, if you don't hear, you will find in that book and you will be able to clarify. And if you still want to engage me outside this meeting, I can go and finish what is remaining. But I want to give you an opportunity to also have another bite. And I'm so impressed in the way that you engage colleagues. Oh, I'm so happy. That is why I can rather give you an opportunity to comment and share your insight and your understanding. Any comment, any question? We're talking about the categorizing here, developing categories here. And we're speaking about the criteria and how do we develop the good ones? How we structure them? What should they contain? How should we name them? And should we explain them? And what is their use? They are a system of categories. Any comment? Anybody who wants to say something? And if you don't, then you are saying you are at liberty. I can continue. Oh, Jabulisile. Yeah, now I can pronounce it. I need the credit there. Jabulisile.
Yes. My comment is firstly, thank you very much. The way you are explaining it to us, especially with the examples that you are giving us, you are simplifying it very well, especially when you gave the metaphor of food. What is food? And then when we talk about food, you can be specific. And also when you gave the example of animals that eat grass and those that eat meat and those that eat both meat and food and meat and grass. So my comment is thank you very much. The way you are explaining it, you are really simplifying it for us, and we are very grateful. Thank you.
Thank you very
Hi,
much,
Doctor.
WC.
Yes, sorry, my mic, I had a bit of a glitch there. Just to add to what the previous researcher said, I'm definitely also enjoying the workshop. So my question, Doctor, is like looking at what you were explaining, the categories, how important it is to name these categories, and the selection should be very clear and concise so that you know that each theme belongs in a specific category. Would I be wrong to go a step further to say, like looking at the example you've mentioned about, carnivores, herbivores, and omnivores, the use of these categories, to explain the interrelationship, will something like an interrelationship diagram using these themes, would that also be something of value, especially when trying to explain you know, the you know, the codings, you know, the codings.
Yes, I think you are right. Remember, you in another section. I don't know if it is step 5. There is somewhere where they talk about visual presentation. You can present how data was analyzed, and you can make a tree, or whether it is linear or it's a hierarchy or it's a pyramid or whatever, in the way that you see uh, your analysis has gone, and that one will actually definitely show relationships between the categories. It will show the major category, the sub category, the sub of the sub, and how all these link up. It's also a good thing. You can make even that visual presentation. You can indicate how it was analyzed.
Okay, thank
It's
you,
very
Doctor.
good.
Thank you,
Thanks
highly
for your
appreciate.
contribution.
Highly
Beautiful, beautiful.
appreciate. Thank you as well.
Thanks. Okay, let me continue because we are now left with 9 minutes. Let me continue with other slides. And this there is this one of dealing with different perspectives. Very often, category systems have to present different perspectives on the data. This includes aspects that do not appear directly as a topic in the interview guide, but which take additional perspectives of analysis into account. Examples may be of formal or linguistic aspects, such as metaphors used, or whether interviewees use the generic you, but usually mostly talk about themselves. No, there's a good example beside this. The question therefore arises as how such parallel perspectives, aspects, or concepts can be integrated into the structure of the category system, which we will illustrate here before. There's an example here that I like the most. Suppose you have conducted interviews with patients suffering from a chronic wound. If you are a medical practitioner and one of your research interests is related to the patient's own knowledge, and let's just look at how people would have responded, then you can look at this knowledge from 2 angles. One, first, what knowledge is mentioned at all? Say, for instance, when you are asking questions, people then talk about knowledge about their medication in relation to the wound. Now, then they can talk about the causes of that wound or that illness, or they can talk about how they take care of the wound or how the wound is taken care of. Those answers are all topical, because they might be related to what is in the interview guide. But it is also of interest whether from a medical point of view, this knowledge is correct or incorrect, and whether the interviewees explicitly state that they have no knowledge in a certain area. Now, this would be taken as additional because you did not ask something that requires them to indicate if this knowledge is correct, or in other words, no one can respond to you saying that they are lying to you. But on your own, when you are analyzing this data, you will find that you have been told about the care, you have been told about the causes, you have been told about other things that relate to the question. You see, but nobody told you about the information if it is correct. But when in your analysis, then you want to find out, is this correct or this is not correct? Or did people know or didn't know? Then it is a different category. If you do that, you are venturing outside the original category that emanated from the interview guide through questioning. And they refer to that as something that has to do with an assessment instead of being it a direct response. The following subcategory system could be constructed for this example. Now, we have listed all those responses down there. You can see the red ones are the ones which were not related to, which were not directly to the question, but which are some things that can be in addition. Now, the first subcategory are thus used to capture the subject area, which is about the causes and all those, the ones that are in red. Okay, the first subcategory is going to talk about causes of illness, about wound care, about other medical, because those are related. That is topic related, and there was a question that has required people to respond in that way. So We are saying the first category are thus used to capture those which are subject area. And the three subcategories at the very bottom are used to assess knowledge in terms of the correctness. Look, sorry, these three: correct medical knowledge, false medical knowledge, no knowledge. About the above. Now, you see now, the red ones are actually assessing the above. If the knowledge is correct, or if it is false, or if there is no, if the respondents do not know anything, they do not have knowledge about the medication. So it means we've got two categories. So of course, the subcategories could also have been divided into the superordinate categories here. The pragmatic one, which is about knowledge, is the one that is about topic, which is topical, which is from the interview guide. And the assessment of knowledge is an additional aspect that did not emanate from the interview guide. And it is an additional aspect. So it means you can have a subcategory representing additional aspects. So in other words, you then additional information or additional way of looking at the responses brings in another category. As in the example, categories can be added to the category system from complementary perspectives in almost every study. So this is just one example, and we are told that it can happen in various respects and in many studies. Now, there's another question which is about how many categories are useful. The question of how many categories should be developed is one of the most frequently asked questions. Now, the answer to this question naturally depends on various factors. Most importantly, one, the type of categories, the length of the interview guide, the number of interviews, and complexity of the topic. So will determine the number of categories. In general, the recommendation is to keep the number of the categories small at the beginning of the analysis. And there's a recommendation here that it's better to start with 7 to 12 categories, where we do not count the structuring categories. The structuring categories are not counted, but formally 7 to 12 categories is a recommendation. Of course, this is only a rule of thumb. This is a general principle. And in small projects with a very specific research question, you may be able to get by with fewer categories. However, you should avoid starting with more than 20 to 30 categories, because otherwise category system can become unwieldy and difficult to work with. If you are in the field already, you should have had this experience. And if this author is speaking the truth, you should be identifying with him. But if you feel that they're not speaking the truth, and you can be able to handle from 20 upwards or 30, even above 30, then you can tell us. In my case, I even didn't know how many categories I had and how I started. But I know that in my studies, you have got a number of categories that are there, or whether they are themes. And I know at a high level, you want to have too many, but you would have subcategories, subsections below that. And you cannot have everything when you start, but you can start broad and then to the specific. You can start having fewer ones, and if you grow bigger, then it means it is dependent on what you are analyzing. When deciding on a categories, it is advisable to always keep the research questions in mind on the one hand, and to think about the later product, which is the journal article, the report, the thesis, the dissertation. You see, you're going to be examined, or you're going to present in an international conference, or you're going to write a specific article. The other editors of specific articles and other authors of books, other editors of books would want you to follow a specific format. If you are going to publish with them, then those are the guidelines. So keep that in mind when you are actually developing your categories. The categories created in this step should have the potential to form a chapter in the end product. Whether this actually happens at the end of the project is not important at this stage in the initial steps of the analysis process. But what I want to say is anything that you write whether it is at the beginning or in the middle of the analysis, you must remember that by that you are writing the final product, you're writing the research report, the definition of your categories, actually the quotations, anything that you put there, the grouping is the structure of your research report, and the content, that which you are writing in there, is the information that is going to be contained in your research report. In the course of the analysis, it will turn out that some categories are more interesting and important than others, or that the analysis will focus on a few categories. Then you discard and throw out those that are not important. It is therefore by no means a prerequisite that all categories must be treated as equally important and processed with the same amount of work. You must remember, when we spoke about systematic, focused and systematic analysis, we were told we cannot be selective of the information, because whether information is negative on the research topic that you are doing, or it is positive, then you must analyze that, because the outcomes, whether negative or positive, are all the results that readers are waiting to hear. And remember, some of the readers are the researchers from the same discipline, from the same college, or from the same, whether you are a nurse or others are, all the medical practitioners will read your report. If you're a political scientist or you're a politician, other politicians and scientists are going to read your report. If you're an environmentalist, you are like me, other people in at Manyeleti and at Kruger National Park or other Ado Elephant Park, when you have written an article in a journal of the animals or the plants or the environment, they will read. And some of them who are researchers will say, no, 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 what is this? What is this? Now, let's look at adding general categories. Regardless of the topic, some special categories should always be part of the category system. Some special, apart from what we have generated from the interview guide. These are categories that should be used in every interview analysis and are usually added at the bottom of the category tree. You see, this is in addition. They are added at the bottom of the category tree. This a category referred to as other. This category is used to record aspects important for the research question, for which there is no suitable category yet. If the category system is divided into several hierarchical levels, the category can also be inserted at the bottom of each sub-level. And we have said earlier on in another slide that if you find some information that cannot belong to any category, you categorize it or pack it as other, so that at a later stage you will revisit and see if this is relevant and it is important information. So this other, if it is important, then you create a category other and you put it under that other. And there is a category refers to as flowers by the wayside. It is quite possible that the interviewees address aspects that seem important to you, but are superficially not relevant to answering the research question. Let's take this into account. It may be that these aspects are still important for the analysis of that, or that they serve as a foundation stone for a subsequent research project. You see now, although it's not very relevant, it's not very, very important to this study, but I could recommend that in future studies, should be investigated. It's important to provide a spot for these observations at this stage so that you can ignore them in your subsequent analysis steps, safe in the knowledge that you will find them again later. This helps you to focus on the research question at hand without getting lost into this alternative path. Now, we're saying this is a beautiful thing that is spoken about, and if it is written, the report will look very good, but it's not very relevant. Then what do? We pack it, and we will first deal with the entire report and see if this is still necessary to be included. So it is something that glorifies, that beautifies the report. And quotable passages, this category is used to record statements of the interviewees in which a subject or a phenomenon is presented in a particular illustrative way, or interesting or unusual way. And we have said that earlier on that the quotations are also important in clarifying or explaining the categories, what they contain, what they entail. So here we are told that we should be able to have them because they are important at clarifying what the phenomenon under investigation it looks like. Now, so if it is illustrative, the quotation is important. If it is it is said in an unusual way, it's so important. And if it is interesting, it is important. This category is also helpful for data exploration in step 1 and can therefore be created earlier. So it means even from the beginning, when I'm exploring data, I will be seeing interesting statements, interesting things that are said in a particular way that I can use to actually motivate some of the statements and some of the categories that I'm going to report on. As soon as you have decided with which categories your analysis should start, you can create these categories as a code system. You can have them separately to have their own categories. These quotations become a category. An abbreviation at the beginning of the category name can help to identify the categories more quickly when working later, even if the name is not fully displayed. This is how you can code these general categories. Instead of biggest world problems, the category would be labeled with BWP to refer to biggest world problems. For a clear structure, you can alternatively or additionally number the order categories. The number order or additionally number the order categories for the subject areas with letters and number the corresponding categories consecutively. You can say A1 or A2, A3, or 2, 2, 2, 2, 3, 2, 1, 2, 4, something like that. It depends on how you want to. This is just a way of knowing, making sure that in your data, when you explore, you know which category belongs to which those that belong together and those that don't belong together will easily be visible because you would have done that. And we're moving towards the end. This is the last. I'm left with one statement, with one slide. So I'm going to finish because we are even beyond our time. In the second step of the focused analysis of the interview, a most hierarchical system of categories is developed from the interview guide. This is this step, with reference to the research questions and supplemented by important theoretical aspects if necessary. For the assessment of category system, it is helpful to refer to quality criteria such as their discriminatory power, their weighting, and their reference to the research question. In the methodological literature, the terms codes and concepts are often used in connection with categories, but the use of these terms is not uniform. So it is optional to decide which one to use. As a rule, the different terms are used to make it clear that these analysis tools evolves as the analysis progresses. You should be aware that categories can differ in terms of various characteristics, such as their closeness to the interview text and degree of abstraction, and that different types of categories do exist, such as thematic and natural categories. And this is the end.
Dr. Korombi, I just wanted to say thank you very much. This was very insightful. It's late in the afternoon, or should I say early evening, but the energy, yeah. So I just want to say thank you so much. I'm learning a lot. I'm thoroughly enjoying it. And yeah, that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nomsa. I'm also learning from you. You make comments that I would not have made. And this shows that all of you do have experience in the field. And these things, I like it that when I see people developing and they are not theoretical, you base this on practical experience. You have read, then you went to implement what you are doing. And congratulations to all of you. And I welcome all your comments. I'm so grateful to have a team, to work with a team like yourselves. Now I'm working with true researchers. And that's why Cecily Tabla sometimes does not want us to refer to students. And I want to avoid that. Now I see that we are true researchers, very, very matured. This month I've learned that you are a matured group and just keep up the good work. I don't know I even tried to write to the center to write to tell you that I'm so grateful in the way that you are engaging and the demonstration of maturity. This is very important. And Cecily Ndelwa, over to you if you want to make closing remarks. My closing remark is that we are a matured group. This has been demonstrated this month.
Thank you, Doctor. I just want to say I'm right at the beginning of being a researcher, and so far I am really learning a lot, and I do appreciate your time as well as the comment from other researchers. It is quite beneficial for me, and I'm looking forward to attending other sessions in the near future. Thank you so much, Doctor.
Thank you. It's my pleasure, Sipe. Thank you to everybody.
I would like to say thank you very much from you, Doctor. And also, I appreciate my colleagues. We are learning from each other through the way they ask questions and the way we answer. So, really, this is a precious group. Keep up the good work. And I thank you very much for all the involvement and everything. We are learning from each other. And I really enjoy the session. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
I just want to reiterate what Shabulile has said. We are learning from each other. I appreciate the comments and the responses that I received from the fellow researchers. And I just want to say to you from the bottom of my heart, Ndo leboga. And I don't know whether I said it
Thank you.
right.
That is very good, Chivenda. Thank you very much.
I'm
I'm
a
also impressed.
Xhosa, but I'm trying.
That's beautiful.
Thank you.
Colleagues, I'm highly humbled. I'm highly humbled by your behavior. Okay, do you have a community of practice? Are you a group or you don't know each other? You're only meeting here. You know, you can make a very strong group. You can move the world, and UNISA can learn from you. I've never seen a wonderful group like this one. You.
Mem Lindelwa has just commented on the chat. She says she loves the idea of the COP.
Yes, colleagues. If you can, if you want to initiate it, Cecily Ndala does have everybody's contact. Just she can facilitate the formation of this, or one of you can lead it. Then all the database she will give, and it will be quite interesting to see that our workshops have even resulted into the establishment of the of practice. And this can go very far because it won't only end while you do or complete this for purposes of your studies. You will even develop yourselves. You've got people that belong to a certain discipline. The lawyers can continue to be a group, the medical practitioner a sub, the educators a sub, mentalists a sub, the engineers, everybody, the psychologists coming out from this community of practice, and you can make from your different perspectives on your own right, and this will be very beautiful. That's beautiful. If you are interested, I will see you initiating it, and if you can do it, oh, my Christmas box will be very, and I think UNISA is going to see something that they've never seen before, because you are going to move the university. But thank you very much. If Cecily Ndala is actually clapping her hands,